President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, this week the Senate's considering a couple of fairly big things. We had a vote earlier this week on a budget proposal to fund the government, for the next couple of years. And we also are going to be voting on a defense authorization bill that is really important to America's national security interests. As we've, brought this legislation to the floor, there's been something conspicuously and noticeably absent, and that is open debate. Something that used to be taken for granted in the United States Senate, a right that was accorded to United States senators. The nice thing about getting to the Senate when you come from the House of Representatives is that when you get to the United States Senate, one person can actually have the opportunity to get amendments voted on and to have those amendments debated. The House of Representatives, those of us who serve there know that there's a Rules Committee. The Rules Committee decides what comes to the floor, what amendments are made in order, how much time is allowed for debate on each amendment. It's a very structured process. What the founders conceived for the United States Senate was something very different. They wanted us to have an opportunity to openly debate the big issues of the day. And there are no bigger issues, I would argue, Mr. President, than the budget proposal that will fund the government for the next 2 years. It will spend literally billions, trillions of dollars of the American people's tax money, and a defense authorization bill, which will authorize, in this case, over $500 billion of spending of the American taxpayers' money. So these are big, consequential pieces of legislation brought to the floor of the United States Senate, but not open to the debate, not open to the amendment process. We just heard the senator from Maryland get up and talk about amendments that if he had the chance to offer, he would have offered. Well, that I think applies to a lot of us. The defense bill, when it comes to the floor here, is, I think, probably gone through a fairly good vetting process. I served on the Armed Services Committee for 6 years. I think they did then and do now a good job of prioritizing these things when they come to the floor. But you have to remember, Mr. President, that there are only probably, 25 or so members of the Armed Services Committee, which means there are 75 United States senators who haven't had an opportunity to have their voices heard on a big piece of legislation like that. Same thing with the budget. The budget conference really consisted of a couple of people. In fact, the conferees, I'm told, the people who were members of the Budget Committee and were supposed to be members of that conference, really didn't vote on it. There was no vote on it when it left the conference. It was negotiated, again, by a couple of people and brought to the floor to be voted on. Something that's pretty darn important, I would argue, to the future of this country, but not open to amendment. No opportunity for senators here to have the opportunity to improve upon. Perhaps we could improve upon it. Maybe we couldn't. But we at least should have had the opportunity to bring issues to the forefront that very, I think, correctly, rightly, should be debated when we're talking about something like a budget, a 2-year budget, and a defense bill, which spends enormous amounts of the American people's tax dollars. So no debate. Shut down here in the United States Senate by the majority leader. Why? Well, I guess because it's really critically important that we get to some of these nominations that need to be voted on before the Christmas holiday. Why? Well, because Lord knows we couldn't vote on them next year, I guess. Well, evidently, I guess we can vote on them next year. And now that the majority has broken the rules here in the United States Senate, changed the rules, they can approve those with 51 votes. So I don't know what the big sense of urgency is on these nominations that would prevent us from having a full and open debate on something as consequential as the defense authorization bill or the budget that being voted on here in the United States Senate. I don't know why these nominations would take precedence over that. It seems to me, at least, that if there was any sense of urgency attached to this, most members on both sides, I think, would acknowledge that we need to do that. But clearly, these are all nominees that can be voted on next year, and now approved with 51 votes, thanks to the majority breaking the rules in the Senate and making it possible to approve nominees with 51 votes. So The very notion, as the majority leader came out here and has said repeatedly now, that we would be here next week on one of the most important Christian holidays of the year, voting on nominees that can be voted on a week later, after the first of the year when Congress comes back into session, seems to me to be really sort of stunning in terms of its audacity. And I would think the American people would conclude the same thing, that we would take a defense authorization bill, that we would take a huge budget bill, and actually sort of just try and sweep them under the carpet, fill the tree so we don't have an opportunity to debate amendments or vote on amendments, but have to rush to get these nominations through, nominations that can be considered early next year and approved now with a 51-vote majority. So think about that. We're talking about, we've had these threats up here on the floor. The majority leader comes to the floor, so we're going to be here. We're going to be here Christmas Eve because we've got to do these nominations. And yet we don't have any time to do the important work like having a chance to debate and vote on amendments to bills like the defense authorization bill or the budget. So that's where we are. And again, Mr. President, I think it's pretty stunning, really, that's what the United States Senate has deteriorated into, and it's regrettable. But hopefully, at some point, people will come to the realization, come to their senses that yes, this is a sort of important week next week for a lot of people around this country, and that perhaps being able to do the nominations a week later, after the first of the year, when they can be approved with 51 votes, what might make some sense and might be a reasonable approach to take with all this. But anyway, I hope that most members here, like most Americans next week, at least have an opportunity to celebrate the Christmas holiday with their families. And as they do that, a lot of Americans will use that opportunity to reflect upon the past year. In many cases, that'll mean life changes that occurred in the last year. For many Americans, it might be a marriage in the family. It might be a graduation, things that we celebrate. It might be something that we look on with reflection and mourn, the loss of a loved one. But this is a time when normally people around this country, I think, reflect on significant changes in their lives in the last year and start thinking about, with anticipation, what the next year might bring. Well, some things people can't control in their lives, changes that some people don't like and can do nothing to control. And one of them, I think, is they start thinking about last year and start thinking about next year for a lot of people is going to be the impact that ObamaCare is going to have on their lives. People are thinking about the fact that they've got these skyrocketing premiums that are now coupled with these outrageous deductibles. The sticker shock is forcing millions of Americans to pay more for health care. President Obama promised the American people, and I quote, Obamacare will cut costs and make coverage more affordable for families and small businesses, end quote. Well, the reality is that family premiums have already skyrocketed since Obamacare became law. American approval of this law is now in the tank. According to a recent CBS New York Times poll, most uninsured people, 57% of those who are uninsured, think the cost of their health care will increase, and just 23% expect the quality to get better. Now think about that. 57% of the people who have no insurance, they're uninsured. People who are uninsured think that their cost of health care is going to increase. And many of them in that same poll, a majority, are opposed to the health care plan. Those are people who don't have health care insurance today. A majority of them are opposed to this plan. For many Americans, the holiday season is going to be filled with angst and uncertainty as they look at facing a coverage gap on January 1st. More than 10,000 Iowans were told by healthcare.gov that they should qualify for federal health coverage, but federal officials have not yet sent complete information on those people to state administrators, who are supposed to then review the applications and enroll people in the programs. My colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley's on the floor, constituents that he represents who are going to be filled with a lot of uncertainty as they face the future. According to the Des Moines Register, Percy Smith of Des Moines is concerned about a coverage gap. And I quote, he says, "I'm losing my optimism because we're getting close to January, and I don't know if I'm going to be covered or not." End quote. That's what he said this week. But this problem will affect more than Iowans. According to the Washington Post, And again, I quote, "Those facing a potential coverage gap include an estimated 15 million people. The law's insurance cancellations mixed with the website's problems might leave some people who have coverage now uninsured in the new year. These are Obamacare's biggest losers," end quote. And that's from the Washington Post a week ago. Today, George Will has an article in the Washington Post that explores this administration's abuse of executive discretion. The article effectively summarizes the exact abuses of executive power that my colleagues and I have been vocally opposed to. Under this administration, if they don't like what the law says, even if they wrote that law, they just simply ignore it. Example after example exists of how this president believes he's above the law. You look no further than their delay of the employer mandate or their rewrite of the laws governing the work requirements as a condition of receiving welfare. As Mr. Will says in his article, and I quote, "In 1998, the Supreme Court held that there is no provision in the Constitution that authorizes the President to enact, to amend, or to repeal statutes," end quote. Yet, as Mr. Will further points out, this President often claims, and I quote again, the President, "He can't wait for our system of separated powers to ratify his policy preferences," end quote. Well, unfortunately, Mr. President, this isn't how our country was founded, not what our forefathers established in our system of governance. As the Federalist Papers number 47, authored by James Madison, says, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny," end quote. Well, the American people are wising up to this abuse of power, and I believe this President must respect the rule of law despite his clear self-interest to act otherwise. And I believe it's only a matter of time before the President continues to abuse executive discretion to correct problems with his law. Instead of becoming forthcoming with the American people and Congress and explaining why parts of this law won't work, he relies on his administrative agencies to issue 11th-hour blog posts or leaks to the media to announce delays in portions of his signature law. Another way this administration is trying to fix problems is to put the burden of fixing problems on others. Last month, the President tried to fix the problem of canceled plans by kicking the can to state insurance regulators to determine whether, in 48 days from the date of his announcement in November, they can change their state insurance regulation policies quickly enough to permit plans to continue to offer those plans available in 2013 and 2014. He expected state insurance commissioners to bail him out to allow Americans to keep plans that they were promised they could keep. He's also expecting insurance companies to bail the administration out of problems as well. The insurance industry will now extend the deadline until January 10th for Americans, I should say, to pay for coverage that starts on New Year's Day. This doesn't fix the problem of coverage gaps, but it's a convenient talking point for the administration. Well, while 2013 was filled with one broken Obamacare promise after another, the President's inability to follow through on making coverage more affordable for families and small businesses was one of the biggest. In a rare moment of candor, Secretary Sebelius was forced to admit, and I quote, "There are some individuals who may be looking at increases in their health care costs." A recent Associated Press poll confirms that some individuals will be facing sticker shock thanks to Obamacare. 69% say their premiums will be going up, while 59% say annual deductibles or co-payments are increasing. A separate poll by the Washington Post and ABC found that just 5% of Americans believe that Obamacare will actually reduce their health care costs. The reality, Mr. President, for many Americans is that dramatically higher premiums, deductibles, and co-payments mean they're going to have less money in their wallets to spend on rent, to pay for college, or to invest in a small business. And as a result, 67% of respondents in a recent Fox News poll say Obamacare should be delayed. 53% of respondents would vote to repeal the law. Well, this holiday season, Democrats should give the American people what they were promised all along: lower costs while keeping the doctor and the plan that they have and like. As we begin 2014, this President and administration should commit to abandoning their power grabs and complete disregard for the rule of law. Mr. President, this law was passed hurried, rushed through here on a partisan vote. Not a single Republican senator here voted for it. And we are now seeing the effects of that. One-party rule, one party running roughshod over the other to try and get something enacted into law, which now, as American people are finding out, they're vetting it. They're the people who are impacted by it. And we're seeing all the adverse harm and impacts that come with it. Higher premiums, canceled coverage, lower take-home pay, higher deductibles, and a less promising future for the American people. We can and we should do better, and I hope that as the Americans this Christmas season reflect on the past and think to the future, that we will resolve around here to do what's necessary to give them a brighter future by putting in place policies that will grow the economy, create jobs, increase the take-home pay of middle-class Americans, rather than give them another gut punch that makes it that much harder for them to provide for themselves and their families. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.